The United States has to be more global minded. And I don't mean an airplane manufacturer selling airplanes or selling trucks and those kinds of things. What I'm talking about are the medium-sized companies, smaller companies who have really the grasp of technology and grasp of innovation. And these are the ones that I think have to be the drivers of the new relationships we have with other countries.
Hello and welcome to Insights from Abroad. This podcast is part of the Middle East and South Asia Initiative in the College of Sciences at the University of Central Florida, and my name is David Callahan. Our mission here is to educate, engage, and influence the international community. Today I'm joined by Jean AbiNader to discuss some topics surrounding our North Africa series. Jean, thank you for joining me today.
David, glad to be here.
Mr. AbiNader brings more than 30 years of experience as a trade association and corporate executive, management consultant, and human resources professional to his role at the Moroccan American Trade and Investment Center in promoting closer economic, political, and security relations between Morocco and the United States. He has advised the U.S. and international companies, organizations, and agencies on management and marketing issues ranging from strategic planning and business plan development to negotiations and cross-cultural communications. With specific expertise in international business and public affairs in the Arab Middle East, he has worked on trade and investment programs, education and training projects, advocacy, tourism, promotion, and similar projects throughout the region. So to start out, could you kind of elaborate a little bit more on your personal experiences? I mean, with a name like the Moroccan American Trade and Investment Center, do you solely focus on just economic issues?
One of the things that happened when we started the Moroccan American Center was to support the U.S.-Morocco Free Trade Agreement. And so what that meant was going around the United States, talking to the business community, the private sector, and identifying for them why they should be interested in Morocco. Because until then, the relationship was primarily security and defense and political. And Morocco really wanted this free trade agreement, and President Bush thought it was a very important initiative to help build and accelerate ties between Morocco and the United States. And so what we do at the Trade and Investment Center was exactly that. We went around and talked to American companies and encouraged them to understand why it was a good idea to invest in Morocco and do business there. More importantly, since that time, Morocco has become the unrivaled center for doing business in Africa. And so American companies can actually go to Morocco and set up in the Casablanca Financial Authority area and have a full suite of services available to them: banking, insurance, finance, logistics. And so Morocco is not just a destination for American business in Morocco, but also throughout the region.
So you mentioned this free trade agreement, and Morocco is kind of one of the few countries that has a free trade agreement with America. Can you explain why that is, or kind of the history surrounding this free trade deal?
The reality is the free trade agreements are of two characters. One is economic, to help promote business where there's a business advantage. In Morocco's case and the other Arab countries, Oman, Bahrain, and Jordan, they're primary political instruments, because what they essentially say is we, the United States, recognize that these people are our friends. And so by our investing in the relationship, we're telling companies this is a good place to do business. The reality is Morocco doesn't have much to offer the United States as much as it has to offer Europe. But the point is, by having a free trade agreement, American companies feel assured that going into Morocco makes good business sense.
So how does it come into play regarding U.S. diplomacy and American economic forces?
America, as you know, traditionally has been interested in open markets and fair markets, and also using economic development as a tool to help companies move up the ladder of economic development. And this is where the free trade agreement has been very helpful to Morocco, because it's made it possible to help build an automotive industry, an aeronautics industry. Intellectual property has been protected, so therefore more IT is going on there. They have extensive call centers. So all of this comes under the rubric of, well, now we have a free trade agreement, and that requires certain legal changes in our system. We have to have IP protection. We have to have certain commercial arbitration mechanisms. We have to have open banking systems. So all of these reforms, if you want to call them that, or positive steps to help accelerate trade are part of a free trade agreement. So it's not just, send your bagels to us. It really is, you have a system now that helps promote business. Not only that, in terms of trade, but also in terms of investment. Companies can come and feel assured that the money that goes in will come back out.
So with the present Trump era, there's kind of the rhetoric of free trade versus fair trade. Has that affected the American-Morocco relationship?
No, because the business we do with Morocco favors the United States. Because, as I said, Morocco is more a destination for investment as opposed to really sending a lot of Moroccan goods to the United States. I think the biggest export are clementines, for example. Like $90 million a year come in through the port of New Jersey, come into the United States. And that's important, but they also do textiles and they do electronic parts. So none of these are threats to American companies. And I think what the Trump administration is interested in is a fair basis for trade, that we give and we get. And that's certainly the situation in Morocco, where I think the balance of trade favors the United States like 10-1. So there's no reason to go picking on Morocco unless somebody wants to take over the clementine business.
So could you kind of give us an overview of how or where Morocco stands presently economically?
Half glass. What's the half glass? Is it full or is it empty? I think that from a point of view, my particular interest is in workforce development. So I'm looking at the nexus of education, job opportunities, and economic growth. So the real challenge facing Morocco, as with every country in Africa and every country in the Middle East, is how do we accelerate economic growth so that we create enough jobs so our young people have work to do and they don't get radicalized or turned off by the system and therefore become problems, either become wards of the state or anti-state. So Morocco is doing its best, but it has real structural issues. I mean, it was like most developing countries. The first generation of industries were created by the government, either through government companies or direct government investment, because they're the only ones who had the ability to put the funds available to build the telephone companies and to build airports and do railroads and to do bus services and all that. Now that's being privatized. And so more and more the private sector is taking over their functions. And as they do that, jobs expand. But there's still, this sense in the back of the older generation that, well, we got to have the government behind us to do anything. And so there's very little risk taking. The younger generation is very different, but they need to be supported to build small and medium-sized enterprises, to be entrepreneurs, to take the risks that their counterparts in other countries are able to do because their governments support them. So there's a transition going on in Morocco. And I think the government knows this, and they have the same problems we have. For example, vocational and technical education is really critical. They need these skills, carpentry, the plumbers, the electricians, the AV techs, and all that stuff. But just like in this country, that's not what kids aspire to do. But it's really important that those jobs get done because they're going to be the last ones that robot's not going to come to your house and fix the plumbing. It's going to be a plumber. And just as in this country, the average wage in some states, I live in Maryland, for example, the average wage for a plumber is $65,000. That's more than school teachers make, and so we have for so long emphasized, you got to have a degree, Well, yes, in some ways you have to have a degree, but wouldn't it be better to have a 2-year degree and then training that gets you into a job as opposed to having a 4-year degree and the uncertainty of employment following on?
Sounds like I need to become a plumber. So you mentioned this lack of risk taking. Do you see some of these young Moroccans trying to reach out to American capital? Because it seems that American capital tends to be very willing to take the risks. A lot of the big American companies come out of risks. So do you see them kind of trying to reach out for that capital?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've been doing this since the last century, a long time. And I have to tell you that what I've noticed is the American companies have become more risk averse as opposed to taking more risk. The ones who do take risk are, as you said, are the new unicorns. They're the ones that are growing and they're changing their entrepreneurial base. They're very agile in terms of the way they approach business and changes in business. But GE has fallen apart. IBM has had to restructure. All of the old companies, the ones that made up the Dow Jones in the last century, have had to reform or get out of the way of the new companies. And that's a reality. And so I don't think that Americans have yet understood, in terms of business investors, how much good they can do in other countries. I mean, if you look at Africa, Africa is going to be the most populous continent in the world by the end of the century. What that means is that that's where the markets are going to be, that's where the growing middle class is going to be. So a lot of investment's going to be made there. And so is it going to be our money going in there, or is it going to be the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians and the UK? So the United States has got some real issues in terms of how it sees itself as a player in the world. So just as other countries and parts of the world are going through transitions, we're going through the same kind of transition.
Kind of with where Morocco is at presently, how does that reflect upon the leadership structure and the bureaucracy?
I take great comfort in the King's messages, because I think his vision is very clear. He wants an inclusive economy, he wants a private sector driven economy, he wants a youth driven economy. The problem is getting past the King to getting people to implement what the King's vision is difficult, because as I said, people are part of a culture that doesn't reward risk taking. It is based on old structures from the 50s and 60s. And it's based on a very limited pie that people are used to dividing up. That's changing, and it has to change if Morocco is going to progress, where young people who are more entrepreneurial, can get the kind of support they need to build the new companies and build the kind of jobs that the country needs in order to survive. Right now, they don't have it. But I think that Morocco can do better. It's not for lack of vision, it's for lack of implementation.
So with this, kind of what sort of economic opportunities are present in Morocco for outsider forces such as foreign governments and corporations?
Well, I'm not excited about having foreign governments come and invest in Morocco, although the Chinese are making good effort. I mentioned in a program yesterday that I've led 5 different Chinese delegations to Morocco, and I look at the way in which they operate. They have almost unlimited funding to do investments, whereas American companies don't have that kind of support from the US government. And so we're at a disadvantage, because we believe economic development abroad should be private sector driven, whereas other countries have their governments driving it. And that makes a big difference, because you get lower interest rates on your money. You can put money in and worry about it 20 or 30 years from now. We can't do that as American investors. We have to see payoffs in a much more short term, because we have to respond to shareholders, stockholders. And so we have to be, it's a different calculus, the way we do development. But does that mean we shouldn't do it? No, I think it means that the United States, again, in this transition we're going through, has to be more global minded. And I don't mean global minded in the sense of an airplane manufacturer selling airplanes or selling trucks and those kinds of things. I mean, those are the big companies. What I'm talking about are the medium-sized companies, smaller companies who have really the grasp of technology and grasp of innovation. And these are the ones that I think have to be the drivers of the new relationships we have with other countries.
With this, as you mentioned, like the issues with needing immediate or relatively quick economic responses, in addition to kind of being more risk averse, do you see these companies, these American companies, lowering investment in foreign countries or in foreign businesses?
I think we've got a dichotomy here. As I said, we have the old traditional companies that are still around, and they're restructuring and re-energizing themselves, and some of them are falling by the wayside. Just think about, for example, all the bricks and mortar stores that have been closing in the last 5 years. So that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, we do have these up-and-comers. I mean, look at Uber just bought Careem, which is a Gulf-based ride-sharing company for $3 billion. I mean, that was unheard of. African startups are being bought for $200, $300, $400 million by US and French and UK companies. So there is a transition going on. And I think that people are recognizing that you follow the money. If the opportunities are going to be in Africa, American companies, they better step up and start putting money in Africa. We have enormous opportunities there in terms of projects like Power Africa. But the mistake is going to be, oh, let's do it government to government. Whereas the original Obama instinct was, no, let's get the private sector involved and the government can kind of put seed money in. And that's the way it should be done. Government should be there as kind of an insurance policy, and the private sector should really drive it, because that way it'll be more efficient, it'll be more directed, and it'll be more agile in terms of responding to what the opportunities are.
With these expanding markets in Africa, do you see Morocco either preparing or becoming a regional actor economically?
Oh, absolutely. They have a part of Casablanca called Casablanca Finance City, or the Casablanca Finance Authority in Anfa, which is where in World War II there was a conference held by FDR and Churchill, and to lay out some of the terms for the end of World War II. But that's now become a financial hub, and it has, as I mentioned earlier, all of these companies that are literally servicing companies who want to work in Africa. So you have banks there, you have financial institutions, you have investment houses, you have insurance companies, you have logistics centers. So that's really important. So yeah, Morocco only has 35 million people, which in terms of purchasing power, middle class is about 3 million people. Well, that's not a big enough market to do anything except sell ice cream. You know, it's really just consumers. So if you're looking for longer term investments, then you have to look at the continent. Morocco speaks French, so that takes care of Francophone Africa. It has a very aggressive and positive banking system, so that provides a real strong basis throughout West Africa and Central Africa as a place to do business. It has rejoined the African Union, so it's got political relations with all the African countries. And it's part of ECOWAS, which is the the Economic Association of Western African States. So Morocco is making all the right moves. The real question is, will this build enough momentum so that it creates enough jobs for Moroccans so they can start really meeting the needs of people who are graduating from universities and high schools for work?
So you kind of mentioned a lot of labor issues. Where can Morocco improve in terms of a lot of these economic issues?
I think the biggest challenge is the matching output of the educational system with the jobs. But I challenge you or anybody to say, what are the jobs going to be 10 years from now? When you look at what's going on in robotics, artificial intelligence, biometrics, digital technology, big data, when you look at all the confluence of all those things, who's going to say what are the jobs in 10 years? I mean, for example, as a graduate of the university, you have to say, okay, what's my job going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now? They're going to be evolving. There are no more long-term jobs. And even the ones that are people-centric, like elder care or sales and marketing, how many of those can you have? I mean, yes, I'm part of the baby boomer generation. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the older generation isn't going to be disconnected from the younger generation. So how do we make sure that the American economy remains dynamic? And part of the challenge here, as in Morocco and everywhere else, is where can we, with some assurance, direct our young people in terms of their education so they'll have the skills to respond to whatever's out there? Well, it means they have to have a digital education. It means they have to have critical education, critical thinking skills. It needs to have problem-solving skills. So literally, we need to re-energize the university and educational system and this 2-year programs so that there's more focus on the thinking and doing than pointed towards specific jobs. So the people themselves can figure out, okay, I want to do this job in 3 years. This is what I've got to do to get there to do it. But to say with some assurance, whether you're in Morocco or the United States, that here's what I'm going to be doing 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I don't know what you're smoking, but it's I don't know who has those answers.
Kind of in relation to these new technologies, do you see crowdfunding as sort of a common practice among the young people in Morocco, or is that not economically feasible?
It has started. It has started. The difficulty is, in order to do crowdfunding, you have to have legislation in place that protects crowdfunding, so that protects it against fraud, it protects it against illicit transfer of funds. But crowdfunding has started on the continent. It's more exuberant in some other African countries and some other Middle Eastern countries. But Morocco will get there. Again, back to a question about rule of law. This is one of those things under rule of law which people don't think about. But crowdfunding requires that you have protection for being able to do it. And so Morocco's headed in the right direction on that. They need to move more quickly. I mean, that part of the drawback of democracy is that people have to talk about everything they want to do. And so therefore, they fall back on their personal interests as opposed to what's best for the country. And so that's why some countries can move much more quickly than others who have parliamentary democracies where everything has to be debated until people fall over dead. And that's the agreement, is you wear them out. But I think it's worth it in the end because then you have more buy-in and you have people who are more committed to the product, the results.
So to our listeners interested in getting involved or learning more, how can they reach out to you or to organizations you work for?
Well, I think that it's interesting to contemplate that because, as I said, things are shifting. Do you go to a typical government agency like the Department of Commerce and say, gee, I want an internship? And, because Department of Commerce has offices all over the United States. They have several offices here in Florida. Do I want to do an internship there and focus on the international? Do I want to find a company that's doing international, like DHL or an airline or something else, and try to work with them? But in terms of hard experience, we just have to, just like anything else, you have to work, find the internships, find the opportunities, and yeah, you can come to talk to people like us, but what we do is refer you to the people who do that stuff. But I mean, for example, in Morocco, they have an organization called CGEM, which is like the National Association of Manufacturers. It's the largest companies in Morocco. They have a U.S. Moroccan Chamber of Commerce. So they have organizations that you can talk with in Morocco and say, okay, what can I do? If I come over there and I want to spend the summer working with a company, do you have opportunities for internships? So you plug away just like you do here in the States and try to find out where are the opportunities, who are the people I can talk to, and how's the best, what makes sense in terms of opportunities for me. And so I think it means that we have to think a little more than we usually do as a college graduate. You know, we kind of have, well, I want to be in business. Well, that's not helpful. So what is it that you really want to do? Do you want to be an entrepreneur? Do you want to be a enterprise builder? Do you want to be someone who works between cultures? What language skills do you have? What international experience do you have? All of things feed into who you are. But I think it never hurts to go talk to people like myself and Ambassador Gabriel and say, you know, I'd really like to be involved in healthcare or in public health. How can I get there? And then people can tell you, they can give you their advice, they can give you counsel, they can point you in a direction. But as I said, I think the world is changing so much now, global business, international business, that one has to cast their net as broadly as possible once they figure out that that's what they want to do. Or do they want to take a safer path and find something here in the United States domestically that will make them happy, but they can build on that to do something internationally.
Well, Jean, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today, and we thank you so much for being here and sharing your experiences with us.
Great to be at UCF. I think what you're doing here is important, and I think it's vital, and I think your students are going to make a big contribution to the world.
Thank you. If you want to learn more about today's guest, our mission, or our program, you can visit us at sciences.ucf.edu/PMBF program, or go follow our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. For the Middle East and South Asia initiatives here at UCF, this is David Callahan. Thank you for listening.